Okay, I'm sharing my screen. One sec. Let's see if I can. Okay. Yeah, do we all see the power of words on your screen? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks for answering. Just because I can't see you guys, see you now, I just see the screen that I'm putting up across. So welcome again. This is a 6-part series. My name is Randy Freed. If you are new to this series presented by Wilshire Boulevard Temple, I have had the pleasure of working with Wilshire Boulevard Temple, formerly as a member of the staff, and now just as a good friend of many in the community. And today we're talking about the Holocaust and hopefully presenting some angles and aspects of the Holocaust that you were previously not familiar with to give you a better understanding. I've spent the last 13 years in Holocaust education, and I welcome you to today. We're talking about really kind of where things begin, the beginning of the end in many ways, the rise of one political party and the end of the Weimar Republic, of a democratic state as we know it, or as we knew it, I should say. And really, it has to do with the power of words. I'll start simply first with this idea. I remember going to religious school as a kid. I hated it. That's a different story. But one of the lessons that I learned, if we look at Genesis, there's a story of creation, right? And the question of who's made first, man or woman? And most people would say, oh, man was made first and the rib was taken out and then Eve was made. But the truth is that's one version. And in the beginning of Genesis, there are 2 stories of creation. So the rabbis argue that, well, one is really just a greater expansion on the first, and they don't contradict each other. Because in one version, for example, man and wife are created, a man and woman are made at the same time. And in another version, Adam and Eve are created. So Adam is created first. And the lesson is that as we read about creation, God simply says things. And if we're to believe the story of the Torah, they just appear. In other words, God has incredible power. Just with mere words, God can create things. Similarly, in our world, we have the capacity. There's a bunch of people entering the room. I see. Anna, hopefully you're letting them in. Thanks. Similarly, we have the power to create with words and the power to destroy. And I wanted to, and oftentimes when people talk about the Holocaust, they talk about, or they start this narrative in 1933 when Hitler becomes chancellor. But we're going to start a little bit earlier. First, who is Hitler? Why Hitler? And it's an interesting story. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time dwelling on Hitler. But Hitler was in many ways a no one, which in many ways makes it very shocking. He didn't have a great relationship with his father, to put it politely. His father was illegitimate. He had picked his nickname. I picked his last name, and then later on in life, chooses Hitler as a last name. Dies early. Hitler's mother dies relatively early in life. He's born in 1889. His mother dies in 1907. Hitler has a lonely, kind of precarious life, making money by drawing postcards and selling them along the way. World War I happens, and World War I and his time in Vienna become the formidable years of his life that shape his opinion. The one benefit, or I hate to even call it a benefit, the one thing that Hitler possessed was the power of speech. He was an incredible speaker. He had the ability to walk into a room and captivate his audience. And so that begins to be how he becomes a leader. So after the war, he becomes a part of right-wing groups. He is still has army connections after the war. He's told to infiltrate the Workers' Party, see what they're talking about, see if what can be gleaned. As we know, after the war, World War I, Germany is a broken nation in many ways by the Versailles Treaty. and is really brought to its knees. This understandably causes a lot of political turmoil, which we'll get into, which kind of opens a path for someone to gain power. And amongst these uber nationalist groups and these beer hall that Hitler oftentimes went, there was conversations about pan and German nationalism. What does that mean to be a German? And in one of those environments, Hitler makes a mention of the Jewish question. And so so he receives a letter back. And the letter is in September 16th, 1919. Adolf Gemlich contacts Hitler. And it's a very famous letter in that, or rather the response, because this is the first anti-Semitic writing of Adolf Hitler. And if we think about this, this is 20 years, almost to the day, before the World War II officially starts and Germany invades Poland, where the largest Jewish population resides, September 1st, 1939. So 20 years earlier, we see this issue of naked anti-Semitism. And then the question of, well, what did he say? So it was a rather long letter. I'm not going to bore you with his long rant, but in his letter, he wanted to establish his credibility as a thinker and someone who understood German nationalism, and as someone who really understood the Jewish question, who recognized, who put forth a whole premise that Jews, in fact, are not a religion. We are a race. And I want to point out on a side note that this is an issue, in fact, that we still, 2021, even amongst Jews, to an extent, you'll have debate about, are we a religion or are we a race? The answer is, of course, that we are a religion. Because our religion influences so much of how we live, there are elements that would make us think that we are a race, but we are a religion. Hitler goes on to really say in his response to Adolf Gemlich that, and it's again a long letter, he is basically saying the issue of Jews is that the Jews are capitalists. They represent the liberal capitalism that has gripped the world, also really globalization. And this is what's bringing Germany to its knees, because Jews have no problem, will turn a system entirely on its head in order for self-gain. And that anti-Semitism can't just be go beat them up. It has to be on a systemic government level, and it has to be a concerted, concentrated effort to relieve the proud German people of this cancer. He also speaks of a previous era in Germany when Germany was at its golden age. This, can we be like it used to be? This great, powerful nation. And so Hitler goes on through this post-war period, is very politically turbulent times in Germany. And the Workers' Party, founded by Anton Drexler in 1919, again, it's a party that advocates for a range of ideas. This was somewhat uniform from left to right, all the way to the extreme right, that there was significant hostility regarding the Treaty of Versailles, because there was even a kind of a guilty clause in the treaty that added to the financial burden of Germany post-World War I, which a financial burden Germany could not afford. Germany was borrowing significant sums of money, most of which was being used to pay its own debt, which this led to a whole series of issues that we'll kind of talk about a little later. And on February 24th, 1920, Hitler comes to the well-known beer hall in Munich and presents a new platform, a new name of the party, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, and presents a platform. Hitler proposes a 25-point manifesto that becomes the singular platform of the Nazi Party. And in a way, many of the issues on this platform, some of them don't sound so out of reason. But you'll see, I'll read about, I highlighted a couple here for you to see that as it relates, that we can see even within his manifesto, while not being named, while they are being named here, about right away, very clear what the intention is. No Jew may be a member of the nation. Non-citizens may live in Germany only as guests and must be subject to the laws for aliens, which Hitler later actually goes to change those laws. So I just want to run through some of his platform. Number one, we demand the union of all Germans in a greater Germany on the basis of a right of national self-determination. We demand equality of rights for the German people and its dealings with other nations and the revocation of the Peace Treaty of Versailles and Saint-Germain. We demand land and territory to feed our people and to settle our surplus population. This is, if you know a little bit about the history of World War I, one of the reasons that Germany loses the war in part is because they can't feed their people. And it's also one of the reasons why Hitler had a long attraction to Ukraine and to Poland, frankly, because it's very, very fertile land. Poland today and the west of Ukraine is still considered kind of the breadbasket of Europe for its agriculture. And Germany was highly developed and didn't have enough agricultural lands to support its populace. The right to vote on states, governments, and legislation shall be enjoyed by the citizens of the state alone. We demand, therefore, that all official appointments of whatever kind, whether in the Reich or in the states or in smaller localities, shall be held by none but citizens. So only citizens can hold political offices. We demand that the state shall make its primary duty to provide a livelihood for its citizens. This, of course, is understandable, again, because of the inflation that is beginning to set in. We'll talk about that in a little bit. It really then becomes hyperinflation. All non-German immigration must be prevented. This becomes a ringing point that the Nazis party harp on over and over and over again, that part of the challenges and the failures of the German state is the acceptance of non-Germans into the country, that immigrants are the problem. This is unfortunately not the only time in history that we see scapegoating of immigrants. But this continues to be a point of the platform that they raise. And I think we get into what I want to point to also is that there are a couple things that you might, that I want to point to. Point 23 in the platform. We demand legal warfare on deliberate political mendacity and its dissemination in the press. To facilitate the creation of a German national press, we demand: 1, all editors of and contributors to newspapers appearing in the German language must be German. No non-German newspaper may appear without the express permission of the state, and they must not be printed in German. The Germans shall be prohibited by law from participating financially in or influencing German newspapers, and that the penalty for contravening such a law shall be the suppression of any such newspaper and the immediate deportation of the non-Germans involved. The publishing of papers which are not conducive to the national welfare must be forbidden. We demand the legal prosecution of all those tendencies in art and literature which corrupt our national life, and the suppression of cultural events which violate this demand. This too, again, becomes a lightning rod within the Nazi Party and an excuse. That Basically, the only good press is the press that agrees with Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. Any press that questions Hitler is to be demonized as an enemy of the state. So again, talking a little bit about some of these outlines that we see, that we just discussed, that we see. And we would think, sometimes people wonder, well, was there actually ever any real editorializing or investigative reporting done against Hitler? And there was. We'll get to it in a sec, but there was. And we'll talk about what Hitler did. But this rhetoric continues to grow. The Nazis become more and more popular. Again, there are several political parties in Germany that are vying for power because Germany writes a new constitution after World War I. It's written by the people, if you will, and it's very democratic. It's a representative government. So you have multiple political parties. The more votes your political party gets, the more seats that party then controls in parliament. So Hitler, growing in stature and strength, on November 8th, 1923, attempts a coup. The beer hall putsch. The Bavarian state is in a state of emergency because of the political unrest. Hitler takes 603 of his SA, these stormtroopers. These are kind of his more violent, virulent supporters who are willing to carry a club. And they go to the beer hall where the newly appointed state commissioner is speaking to a crowd of about 3,000. These are social democrats that he's speaking to. They also had mounted a machine gun actually inside the beer hall. They surround the beer hall. There's an immediate back and forth and arguing that happens. A gun is fired in the auditorium into the ceiling to suddenly cause a distraction and chaos. And the goal was that they would assassinate the state commissioner. Hitler fails at this attempt. A large riot breaks out. 16 SA members are killed. I believe, if my memory serves me, it's 2 or 3 police officers are killed in the process. Hitler is wounded in this exchange, but his devotees are able to get him away from the scene. But ultimately, he's arrested 48 hours later. He goes to court and is charged with treason and is sent to prison. It is this formidable time in prison that he writes Mein Kampf, My Struggle. Mein Kampf, it becomes this long, on the one hand, I would say it's worth reading. On the other hand, I would say don't waste your time. Also became very debatable because there were, in almost immediately, there were multiple translations of the book. And there was debate about whether, is this a correct translation as it was. I apologize, my dog enjoys the subject matter. Luba, stop. And it's published in 2 volumes. And so right away we see that this book is gaining steam. By the eve of the war, over 5.2 million copies are sold, and it's translated into 11 languages. Amongst other things that we see in Mein Kampf, the sacred mission of the German people to assemble and preserve the most valuable racial elements and to raise them to dominant position. All who are not of a good race are chaff. Hitler ascribed international significance to the elimination of Jews, which, quote, must necessarily be a bloody process. The question sometimes I wonder is, how on earth did we not see this coming? And by we, I mean the world. It was very clear. He said what he wanted to do, starting in 1919, and repeated it. Why, when you ask most survivors, they will tell you, what is the one thing you learned from this period of history? Oftentimes they will say, if someone threatens you, we take it seriously. No matter how far-flung it sounds, no matter how far-fetched, take it seriously. But I'm willing to say, though, that fortunately there was, back to the point about the press, there was actually someone who stood up to Hitler. It was the only paper. It was the Munich Post. The Munich Post, from very early on, for almost 12 years, wrote editorial after editorial, an investigative report, on almost a daily basis, hammering away at who Adolf Hitler and his SA, his thugs, really were. That they didn't really care about Christian values, that they were racists and bigots, that they had orgies and sex parties. They didn't believe in any Christian ideal, if anyone was watching. They preyed on the elderly and the weak, and they played on people's emotions to make Germany a better place for the German middle class. However, they were corrupt and only wanted to fill their own pockets with money. For 12 years, this paper on and on challenged Hitler. As Hitler gains power, we see this paper is by SA troops. They are, rioters are beaten up. The offices are ransacked. In one incident, the paper actually is broken. The building is broken into. Most of their files are set on fire in the middle of the office. Actually, there are elements of the Munich Post that are pulled out during some of the well-known book burnings and are burned. Ultimately, the paper is shuttered once Hitler becomes chancellor. The editors either go to concentration camps or are shot. And it's the end of the sole voice. So we know that the free press, the Washington Post has this moniker that they started to add, this tagline, if you will, democracy dies in darkness. And it's true. And it was laid out in a manifest so much earlier by Hitler that we can only have press that agrees with you. So slowly we are seeing elements erode of a democracy. And we'll get a little bit to, well, why? What else is happening? So the Weimar Republic really only lasts, or Weimar, I should say, for a short period of time coming out of the war. And the picture is a 50 million Deutschmark note. Talk about hyperinflation. So as I said, it was truly democratic. The National Assembly writes the Constitution. The president is elected popularly, and then the president appoints the chancellor. And then the legislators are elected through proportional representation in the Reichstag, which is the upper house. And here was one element, perhaps a fatal flaw, written into the new constitution. And we have, by the way, and most governments have this, that in a state of emergency, some of the bureaucracy, the red tape, if you will, the guide rails are taken down.
Okay.
To allow, in order to allow a head of state to act swiftly. And so Article 48 of the new Constitution of the Weimar Republic states, in a state declared emergency, the chancellor basically has the power of a dictator. The chancellor can cure all. They can, in their wisdom, deploy the military. They can suspend parliament. There are a lot of powers that are vested with the chancellor in a state of emergency. So we see 1922 is a Spear Hall putsch. In 1923, We see an invasion of the Ruhr, which is an industrial zone of Germany. And this area is invaded because people want their money. Foreign collectors wanting reparations to be paid. It's also something very much that Hitler said. He said, we're not going to keep paying these exorbitant payments for the Versailles Treaty. This is not something we'll do, and basically the rest of the world can kick rocks. So France and Germany invade. This is now 1923. They invade and they sit there for 2 years. It's a military occupation. This military occupation devastates even more so already the German economy. And I want to put a little bit of that in perspective. You see the 50 million Deutschmark note. So I want to put it in perspective. So the exchange rate of the dollar and the Deutschmark in 1919 was, or let's say before the war in 1914, is 4-1. In 1919, 8-1 in January. By July, 14-1. January 1920, 26-1. July of 1920, 37-1. January of 1921, 62 German marks to $1. Another way of looking at it is if we look at the weekly cost of living in German marks for low-income family of four, for food and housing and clothing, it's like 21, 22 German marks per week. By this time, we're talking in January of 1923, that same family that just less than a decade, 9 years before, was living on roughly 20 German marks a week, now needed to come up with nearly 25,000 German marks. This had untold impact on the German people. Most workers were paid daily and then given time to shop before the value of their wages fell further. Depositors received letters from their banks informing them that their life savings were worth less than the administrative cost of maintaining their accounts. Young women who had been setting aside money for their dowries saw their savings evaporate, making traditional German marriage impossible. There's several stories of a concert pianist that would perform in restaurants. They would be paid with a suitcase of bills, and then they would exchange that for lunch for a few sausages. And this is when we start to see these 100,000 Deutschmark, 50 million, 5 billion. And a lot of this is based because of American loans. We see in 1929, the stock market crash, the depression. This again pushes the German Republic even further down. 6 million are unemployed. And these political parties are all, the chancellor keeps changing. It's like, you think Israeli politics are bad. In the Weimar Republic in the late 1920s, there is almost every year, 6 months, there's a new chancellor. And you have paramilitary groups that are roaming around various cities, the SA. So in Bavaria, you see that where the Nazi party is strongest. You see them gaining ground because they're adamant about, so they're spelling it plainly. To the common German, and to the right side of the aisle, they're saying, you are having a problem. You can't feed your family because of the immigrants over there, because the Jews over there are taking all the money, because of this liberal capitalism, which is a plan of the Jews. We're going to stop all of that. And so there's election after election, and the Nazis gain power. In 1932, the Nazi Party actually receives its largest chunk yet, 37%. They come in second to the historic field marshal, Hindenburg. Hindenburg is a war hero. He's celebrated by the right, and he actually didn't want to run for politics. He was done. He was in his 80s. He had already served a 7-year term. He was ready to call it quits, but he knew that if he didn't, that no one would be able to defeat Hitler but him, and even that was a maybe, to be president. And the president chooses the chancellor. So he decided to run, though he didn't want to. The Nazi Party comes in second with 37%, but Hitler demands to become chancellor, because what Hindenburg had feared was that it was actually the left that voted for him. The middle and the left voted for Hindenburg and raised him to power because they were fearful of Hitler and what Hitler would do to the nation. And Hindenburg, in many ways, the other fatal mistake that Hindenburg makes is Hindenburg decides to accept the Nazi Party's request or demand that Hitler be made Chancellor of Germany, in the hopes that Hindenburg would be able to control him. Hindenburg kept some military appointments to his not going to the chancellor. They would stay with the president, and some of the bureaucratic, administrative things would remain under Hindenburg's control. This would be the next fatal mistake. So on January 30th, Hitler is appointed the Chancellor of Germany. And literally 4 weeks after he is Chancellor, the Reichstag is set on fire. And it's an interesting story about there was a man by the name of Hans Floite. Hans Floite was a theology student walking home at night after studying at the state library. And as he was crossing the square, I don't know how many of you have been to Berlin, but as he's crossing the square in front of the Reichstag, he hears a window breaking. And he alerts Karl Buvert, who was a local police officer walking the beat. And Floyd did that. I heard a window break, reported to the police. He goes on his way. The police officer then goes to check the building. And he thinks that maybe he sees some people inside the building, maybe someone carrying a torch. He fires a gun at the giant building, doesn't really do much, can't really see anything. And there's news about people in military fatigues at the Brandenburg Gate. And so something is happening. And they note the person. They note that they saw someone, and they know that they had this tip that the Reichstag was going to burn. But in the chaos, we never know who it. We never find out who it is. They never investigate it. That person disappears. The Parliament building is practically destroyed by fire. And then Article 48, which I mentioned earlier, which is that in the state of emergency, the chancellor can utilize it and declare pretty much ultimate power. And because he can say that the state is literally under attack, perhaps from within. And there were different theories, people who Hitler blamed for the fire of the Reichstag. But nevertheless said, look, there's so much political turmoil. That's it. I'm utilizing Article 48. Where this is all going to be under Nazi control. We will set the terms. Hindenburg dies, actually, this is actually incorrect, my own mistake. He dies actually in August of 34. But in 33, in many ways, the office of the presidency dies. Maybe that's what I was thinking when I made this, apologize. Hitler declares himself Führer, so he has two titles: Chancellor of Germany and the Führer of Germany, the father of Germany. And the Third Reich is kind of declared. The Third and Reich in German means normally it's used in referring to kingdoms or realms. So he felt that his ascension, if you will, and self-declaration as Führer, this was now the third kingdom of Germany was being born. And that becomes really the end of Germany as a democracy. Hitler says in his first speech to the Reichstag, as Chancellor, I should say, he says, "We stand firmly together for Germany, and we stand firmly together with Germany. I am handing you the new insignia," that was the swastika, "knowing I place it in the most loyal hands in Germany. In the past, you have proven your loyalty to me 1,000 times, and in the future, it cannot and will not be any different." And stop sharing my screen 1 second so I can see all of you. And I'm going to go back to Zoom so I can see all of you. Make sure I'm not talking to myself. Nope. And we see this tremendous fall of a nation. And there's a chat. Let me see. And we see this. We see Germany begin to go down a very dark course, which we'll get into, because right away, as soon as Hitler becomes Führer, as soon as the Nazis have consolidated power under Article 48, by the way, all of which was done constitutionally. Concentration camps begin to pop up, arrests of anyone who poses a threat to the Nazi party. We see the Night of Long Knives, which we'll get into. That happens in 1934. This is when basically the SA, which is kind of the pre-paramilitary, not official group of thugs that Hitler controlled, mixes with the now official, more lethal, because it has the backing of government, because it is government, of the SS, the Schutzstaffel, which literally means the home guard. They have a night and they basically decapitate each other. They kill off any of the leadership, the brown shirts within the SA that could pose a threat or want to go their own way. And the SS become the new secret police. And they're the ones also who operate death camps and concentration camps later as we go. So here's the first question I see is, why would someone guilty of treason be read so widely? It's a good question. And I would say the following. I would say that there are some people that said Hitler was guilty, and there are some people that said Hitler was not guilty. There are some people that said Hindenburg was a part of the old guard. They was part of the old government that got Germany in trouble in the first place. Hindenburg is the one that lost the war. Hindenburg is the one who allowed the country to fall, that would accept these terms of Versailles and Saint-Germain. And what you're hearing about me in the Munich Post is, I'll use a modern term, fake news. He actually referred to the Munich Post as the poison kitchen. In other words, everything that was coming out of the Munich Post was poison. It was poison for the people. And he constantly referred to, actually, that's another book suggestion. It's a great book called The Poison Kitchen. Constantine Film, which is a German film company, at least pre-pandemic, they were talking about making a movie about it because of the fact that this was a newspaper in Bavaria standing up against one of its own, if you will, that it came from its landsmen, its own countrymen. But I think he was read because there were people that really it made sense to them. They didn't want to. They were willing to. Put it this way: there's an article in Psychology Today that gets, it's been replayed, kind of reprinted several times. And it asks the question about American politics and why is it that some people are willing to believe certain things in American politics, whether it's true or not true. And the answer was, sometimes it's easier to believe the lie than it is to accept that you're wrong. And I think that we see elements of this unfortunately, in today's society. And we also see this in Nazi Germany or in pre-Nazi Germany, where people wanted to see, well, what's he saying? What do you mean, my struggle? And what the picture that he paints in Mein Kampf, I find it rather a very tedious read. But what he's taught, what Hitler has a bizarre worldview that is it's about two things. One is Jews are the problems of everything. Two, that there's a natural order to the world, that the Germans should be at the top of the food chain, and anything that and by the way, and laws, order, formal organizations, even government and state, these are all perversions of the natural order that allow the Jew to kind of game the system, to gain in material wealth and to gain in power. And so he was going to come in and write the course and rid the world of the Jewish problem, right? And for some people looking for an excuse, that why is their life upside down? Why is it that they can't feed their family? Why is it that their money in the bank all dried up? We're willing to read it and we're willing to listen. Don't forget, after the war, you also have a young generation of young teens. So people that were too young to fight during the war, World War I, who come of age in hyperinflation and depression in Germany. They can't find a job. They can't find someone to date and get married. They can't, there's no real nightclubs or somewhere to sow their wild oats. And I shouldn't say just men, but younger people, but specifically the men, they gravitate to someone who's going to say, who's telling them what they want to hear. It's like when you're in elementary school and we all probably remember, tell stories, right? You're running for class president, 6th grade or whatever. And there's the one kid who always gets up and says, we're going to have more recess. We're going to have pizza at lunch or whatever it is. And everyone's like, let's vote for them. And the smart kids are like, what's he talking about? They're not going to give us more recess. What kind of fakakta? What is he saying? But this is what happens, and I think that we have to recognize that, and that's why one of the reasons why I said in the first class, when we start talking about the Holocaust, it is not just a study of facts. It's also, I think, an examination of human characteristics, and unfortunately, a number of characteristics that are not gone from human nature. I see another question. Was there any political opposition to the Nazis prior to 1933? Where were the Jews politically? Great 2 questions. Thank you, Eric. So number one, yes, there was. The Social Democrats, so there was a series of parties, and I'm going to grab my notes because I'll confess, I don't remember the name of every party. So by the elections that start happening like 1931 and 1932, because it really is, as I said previously, we have a host of chancellors coming in and out of power. But you have the main parties. You have the Communist Party of Germany, the Independent Social Democratic Party, the Social Democratic Party, which, by the way, still exists, and they're the largest and longest active party in Germany. They started in 1875, Social Democrats. You have the German Democratic Party, the Center Party, the Bavarian People's Party. Now we're starting to get to the right. The German People's Party, the German National People's Party, and then the Nazi Party, literally the most extreme party in the country. The Jews, frankly, were all over the map. They were not uber politically active, but I will say that most, and it's interesting, most of the German, the intelligentsia or the highly educated Jews, or even those, most had served in the military even. And so the thought of the thought of some of the initial laws and some of the initial things in that first year, 33 to 34, when the Nazis start making rules, they're like, well, I got the German Cross, or I served in the nation. Hindenburg and his appointees will protect me, and I'll be able to get an acceptance. I'll be able to get a waiver to this rule against me. So I'm just going to keep my head down. I'm not going to make too much noise. I would say also the way that Jews were politically active, especially in this period of time, kind of the interwar period in Germany, same in the US actually, was Shah still politics. So Shah as in quiet, still, quiet, right? For a little Mama Lushin, for those of you who a little Yiddish, right? Jewish politics was done, if you know Hebrew, b'machteret, under the table. It was done quietly behind closed doors. We're not going to make a big scene because we don't necessarily have the power influence to make big changes in other ways. We'll do it quietly. So the Jews they were mostly center left, but there certainly were Jews on the right, but not that I've never seen any significant significant concern or a significant character like Jewish main figures that were supporters of the Nazi Party. Was there concern from outside the world? Yeah, I mean, yes and no. In America, as we see in the 1930s, for example, when we see the growing problem, and we as in America, when America sees the rising tide of anti-Semitism and racism, and the threat to international security that Nazi Germany was posing on its ascension, right, breaking its treaties, but rapidly building a military, America's initial response is, it's not our problem. It is the Jews' problem. It is Europe's problem. We have our own problems here in America. We just fought a war that was supposed. Remember, right? What was World War I? World War I was the war to end all wars. That was supposed to be it. But really, the world was waiting for the second shoe to drop, right? Against globalization, and America was not interested. And that's always sometimes a criticism that Roosevelt get, that he was an anti-Semite. That's a whole nother discussion, and I'm happy to have that conversation, whoever has time, one day. And a lot of people who are older and were alive during that time will say, you're damn straight he was, because he didn't do enough to say, and didn't want to pay attention. And by the way, we knew everything that was happening in Nazi Germany. If you go to I think now it's called the LA Holocaust Museum. It used to be Museum of the Holocaust, Los Angeles. They just changed it. They did some rebranding. But they have on each exhibit, they have in pressed into steel, the cover of the LA Times from the 1930s. And you see story after story after story. The world, we knew what was happening. We didn't care. And I would submit to you the following. How much did you do or say, or even better, did you write a member of Congress when the Yazidis, Arab Christians, were being butchered by Muslims in the middle of the desert in Iraq by ISIS? Did you write letters of condemnation, or did you write your senator or member of the House or the president and demand action by Uyghur Muslims being imprisoned by the Chinese government? The reality is, by the way, and I'm guilty too. I'm saying this as someone who talks about it and teaches this. I did write something actually about the Uyghur Muslims, but that was because I was a part of the World Jewish Congress, writing a bigger letter, and it's just me. But how politically active are we? And we get active when it's at home, right? My dad used to say, a different subject, but my dad used to say it's always a statistic, like cancer, heart disease, whatever, until it happens to you. And that, I mean, if anything, that's what I would hope also comes out of this. And I think some of you probably already know this just from life experience. We have to speak up. And German Jews actually didn't really want to speak up. They thought it would pass. Oh, he's just crazy. This will pass. oh, calm down, you're getting excited. You have, you're just afraid of Hitler. The paper's exaggerating to sell papers. He's not really that bad. He wants to help all Germans, give all Germans a job, give us all fed. How can that possibly be bad? The Jews are different than us anyway. They keep to themselves. They pray to their own God. Are they really German anyway? They call themselves Jews. They don't really speak our language unless they have to. All the same stereotypes, quite frankly, that we've heard in our country about immigrants. So it's the same. And by the way, not just America and Germany. I think you can see this in other countries. But that's why just another pitch if you really are bored. It's a chilling read, The Death of Democracy, because he's a professor. Professor Het really kind of outlines what happened. And you see, I'll be very honest, you can see similarities between what happened in the fall of the Weimar Republic. And I will say, the course that America seemingly seemed like we were on a similar trajectory without the we're going to get rid of the Jews and it's going to be a bloody mess. Yes, a big difference. But some people say if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. The George Santana quote. I actually prefer another one that says history throws stones at the future. In other words, it's right variations on a theme. So anyway, so that's today. If there's any other questions, comments, feelings, thoughts, unmute yourself. I'd love to hear any comments. And because we have 7 more minutes. Anyone?
I actually do have a question.
Sure.
Which everybody on the Zoom knows the answer to, and I'm just have buried my head. Why was Hitler so violently anti-Semitic, or were the Jews a really good target to propose, to push forth his other agenda?
I mean, I think that it's a great question, and honestly, I think that there are literally. I can think of at least 6 different books, different professors that have kind of tried to delve into the psychology of Hitler on the issue of anti-Semitism, and some saying, well, when his mother was sick, his mother actually had a Jewish doctor, and he was obsessed with his mother. And when she ultimately died, some people say, well, he blamed the doctor and blames the Jews. But actually, the doctor was given safe passage out of Germany. But I think 2 things, to be quite honest with you. I think the anti-Semitism came from just some unfortunate, deep-seated anti-Semitism that existed in the country, number 1. But moreover, and by the way, I want to be very clear, I am in no way, shape, or form trying to absolve Hitler of anything. Believe, God forbid. Hitler also knew that in order to mobilize a people, and I think he learned this just from, although he was, not impressive scholastically, I think he, as a character, was impressive in terms of, I guess, his social intelligence. And he knew how to read a room, and he knew what he was hearing, and he knew that there was definitely an anti-immigrant sentiment as things in the country were turning downward. And he chose a group of people that were prominent in banking. So Jews also made a very convenient target, right? Are they German Jews or are they Jewish Germans? What's going on with that? Why do they have to pray somewhere else? Why do they have different customs? Why is it that they're working on a Sunday? We're going to church. Why is it that they do this weird? What's with the leather straps? What is this? Why are they, they don't believe in the Bible. There was tremendous, and by the way, in Germany also had tremendous anti-Semitism. Germany was, we talked about this last week. There was Jews had left Germany all the way back in the 13th century because of pogroms. Listen, it's one of those things like, why does anyone hate the Jews? Rabbi Lau goes into a whole thing which is so beautiful. He says, you know what? The anti-Semites, they need a psychiatrist because they hate the Jews if we assimilate. They hate the Jews if we don't assimilate. They hate the Jews if we're in banking and we work out, or we work in non-traditional businesses. They hate us if we work in traditional businesses. They hate us if we live in the countryside, and they hate us if we live in the city. It is not my job to worry about, as he says, it's not my job to worry about why they hate us. That's between him and their shrink. It's my job to ensure that we are, as a people, are protected. And I don't know why Hitler was so anti-Semitic. I haven't read a reason I'm thoroughly satisfied with, but I think the one that has the most traction, I think, is that we were an easy target because we're different. Because it's always easy to blame the other, right? The story of Passover, which is all about that. We have that element in this Passover story. It's always easy to blame someone that's not like you. I see 2 comments. One, was there a stronger anti-Semitism current in Austria? That's an interesting question. I don't know how to measure that. I feel the short answer, in my opinion, would be no, because post World War I, right? There's the breakup, right? So the monarchy is gone, and now Germany, the Weimar Republic, comes into existence as its own country. Austria is standing alone. Tons of a lot of big business and merchants and business class are Jews in Austria. There is anti-Semitism, of course, as there is throughout Europe, and we see in the interwar period, we actually see a rise of anti-Semitism across the world. It's one of the unique aspects of anti-Semitism in America that despite rising anti-Semitism here, Jews were still able to assimilate and still able to accumulate wealth and accomplish and reach higher heights despite significant growing anti-Semitism. Were those who rejected Hitler from the Art Academy Jewish? I've heard a couple different stories about that. I don't know enough to say. I'll try to find that answer for you, Nan, but I don't know. I've heard that story too, where people say that it's because he was rejected by Jews because he wanted to go to art school, he wanted to be a famous painter, and he was rejected. I think there's a lot of theories because, again, I think that it's understandable why we would struggle with the notion of how could someone have such venom and such hate. Max Liebermann was president of the Prussian Art Academy. Thank you, Eric. So I will take a stab that Liebermann is likely Jewish. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. But there's no writing that I've seen. Doesn't mean it doesn't. There's no writing that says, nowhere does Hitler say, aha, this is why I'm an anti-Semite. Because he comes to his anti-Semitic writings right out of the army after World War I, where he's wounded and he spent time in a hospital. Then he attends some lectures of right-wing parties on pan-German nationalism. So this is maybe before the war he was rejected when he had finished secondary school, maybe, but there's a lot of talk. You can read about how excited he was. And there's a photo of him in a giant rally, but if someone took the time, zoomed in, he's very upfront. He was very excited when war was declared in World War I, and that he could be a part of something greater than himself. He was very excited about that. Okay, guys, it's 1:01. If there's any other questions, you're welcome. But otherwise, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Next week, we're going to get into, now that the Nazis are in power, we're going to start looking and talking about the establishment of ghettos and the literally over 400 laws come on the books. And I'm hoping Marion Tursky, who's a Polish historian and Holocaust survivor, will be able to join us next week. I'll just say I'll either play a clip of him or he'll be with us, just because he's 94 years old, and between his age and the time difference in Poland, it's, I'd say 50-50 that he'll be able to join us. He said he's going to try. But thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday in this beautiful weather. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you so much. Have a good
Thank you. That was so good.
Is he gone?
Thank you.
Thank you. Terrific.